Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I remember how hollow that night sounded. The wind was so loud you could swear it was speaking, whispering warnings I didn't understand until it was too late. I was on Interstate 80, mile marker 239, logging my position over the radio. Trooper Clausen, badge 452 in the blizzard. It was January 17th, 1992, and I'd been on the road for 6 hours straight. Temperatures were plunging past minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, visibility down to 10 feet. Everything looked the same, white, stretching toward nowhere. I didn't hesitate when dispatch told me about a stranded vehicle buried in a drift. Most drivers had quit for the night, hunkered in truck stops or turned off the highway until morning. But I'd signed up for this, to find people who needed help. I was wearing 3 layers under my coat, 2 pairs of gloves, a balaclava. I could barely feel my toes anymore. When I saw the sedan, half swallowed by snow, I keyed the mic again. I've got a dark-colored Taurus here, out-of-state plates, no lights. I'm checking for occupants. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about protocol or procedure. I was just going to see if someone needed help. The driver's door was cracked open, frozen halfway, snow packed inside. I pulled it the rest of the way, wincing when it creaked like it was shouting in protest. Inside, nothing. No footprints, no bodies. The car looked empty, as if someone had slipped out seconds before the blizzard buried them. I patted the back seat. No one jammed against the door, no shivering silhouette hunched over. Just a small suitcase lying where it had been tossed in a hurry. I called it in. Scene secure, no one in passenger area, requesting trunk check. Over. I felt uneasy, like the car had been waiting for me to open it. I knelt in the snow, fist nearly buried before I found the handle. My glove froze the second I unlatched it. The trunk lid popped up with a sharp crack. My torch caught a glimpse of pale skin, then his eyes. He was sitting upright, legs bent at the knees. His gaze was fixed on the ceiling of the trunk, but it felt like he was staring right at me. Mouth taped, wrists bound. He'd been dressed in a dark suit, clean, pressed, like he'd been readied for dinner, not dumped into a storm. His face was frozen solid. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and I swear I heard the snow outside hush for a moment, as if the world realized something was terribly wrong. I found a body, cold to the touch but not frozen. I radioed, voice hollow. Possible homicide, need backup and forensics ASAP. I stood up, turned to stay behind the trunk lid for as long as I could. The wind clawed at my coat, tried to push me away. I slipped off one glove, keyed the mic again. This isn't frostbite. He was dead before the temperature hit him. I sank to my knees beside the car and pressed my hand to the frozen shoulder of the victim. His skin was ice cold, but the wound marks around his neck were too fresh. I couldn't tell if flashlights were shimmering across his face or if I was seeing things. The longer I stared, the more the shape of terror in his expression twisted into something I couldn't unsee. I remembered the heat of a burnt-out cigarette that morning, pressing into my palm while I scribbled report notes in the patrol car. I was wearing my uniform, feeling bulletproof, until his eyes met mine. My hands shook so badly I had to slam the trunk shut, seal him back inside. For a moment I could hear the hollow echo of that slam undercut by my own heartbeat racing too loud in my ears. Backup arrived in waves. First, another trooper with high beams cutting through the snow, then the county coroner, then state police detectives. They set up floodlights, orange cones, yellow tape. They did their job, soft voices, clipped questions, gloved hands rifling through evidence. I kept my distance, watching them pry the suitcase open, finding clothes and old receipts. I saw the coroner study the body through goggles, muttering about ligature marks and skin discoloration. I walked away for a minute, taking deep breaths, but the cold followed me. I climbed back to the roadside and slammed my glove against my thigh to try and bring feeling back to my fingers. Then I heard footsteps crunching toward me, and Detective Walsh handed me a report pad. "Clausen, I need your statement in detail," he said. Under those lights, I told him everything: the radio call, the open door, the suitcase, the trunk. I described the victim's look of terror, the precise way the tape bit into his skin. I told him about my own fear, how I'd thought I'd seen a hand twitch. He scribbled it down, eyes never leaving the page. Halfway through, my chest tightened. I saw that man again, trapped in the trunk, a silent witness to something monstrous. I almost said I'd found him alive, begged for help, but I knew better. By then, he'd been dead longer than I cared to admit. Hours passed while they documented the scene. I watched the lights dim as dawn tried to break through the storm clouds. We bagged the body, loaded it onto the coroner's wagon, covered it with a tarp. I followed at a distance, keeping my distance from his cold stare. Back at the station, I sat under a desk lamp and wrote my report. I detailed the date, time, weather conditions. I described the evidence with clinical precision, detailed enough for a textbook, detached enough to hide the tremor in my hand. I typed the victim's name: Richard Meyer, 38, pharmaceutical representative from Minneapolis. Reported missing January 13th. Estimated time of death, roughly 48 hours earlier. A timeline that meant he'd been buried in that storm, alive or dead, I couldn't say. The storm finally broke late morning, the world flooded with gray light. I walked back to my car, shoulders heavy under my coat. I turned the ignition, let the heater struggle to warm the cab. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked strange, eyes too wide, face drawn tight. I drove home the long way, circling side roads, checking every car on the shoulder, every trunk I passed. I knew someone trusted enough to open for help. I couldn't stop checking. That night at home, I tossed and turned. I heard the wind on the windows, the furnace clicking on and off. I imagined I felt frozen items sliding across my floor, heard breathing behind my bedroom door. I lay there remembering the prisoner in that trunk, how thoroughly someone had prepared him for me to find. And I realized how little control I actually had when the next storm rolled in. The second call came in 2 weeks later. I was back on the night shift running interviews and reviewing evidence, but half my mind was still frozen on that first body. We'd pulled Richard Meyer's trunk shut, stored him in the coroner's freezer, and filed away the papers. We adjusted procedures, requiring 3-minute physical checks instead of quick cursory walks, but nothing prepared me for what Officer Weber found. I'd known Danielle Weber ever since the academy. She was sharp, by the book, the type who never cut corners. On February 2nd, she'd been on I-94 near Eau Claire, fighting the same whiteout conditions. She radioed me later. "Clausen, sorry to bother you, got another one." I heard the fatigue in her voice, that same twitch of unease I felt myself. She described a black Taurus, Minnesota plates again, stopped near mile marker 112. Car, half buried, no footprints. An open driver's door. She'd checked inside, no one in the cabin. She called it in like we'd drilled. Vehicle confirm, trunk check requested. Then she popped the trunk. She found Thomas Kraft, 42, insurance adjuster from Chicago. Same suit-clad, meticulously clean clothes, like he'd been prepared for a photo shoot, not a killing field. She said his eyes were open, too, blank stare fixed on the snow above. Tape around his wrists, duct tape across his mouth. She thought she heard him breathe at first, like he might still need help, but his chest was still. Rigor had already set in. Ice crystals on every fold of his collar. By the time I got there, she was pacing behind the yellow tape. She looked at me like she was warning herself not to collapse. "Bad copy, Clausen," she said, voice breaking for the only time I ever heard her stumble. We both knew this was no random killer. Patterns aren't coincidences. We set up floodlights again, coroner's truck, detectives. I watched Weber guide them through the scene, her flashlight hand barely steady. I stayed back, thinking of Meyer, trying to separate the two of them in my mind so I could breathe. But they were mirror images, both professionals stranded in storms, both bound, tortured, concealed, both left as puzzles for us to piece together. After they bagged Thomas Kraft's body, we drove back to the station in silence. Weber in the front seat, eyes fixed on the windshield like it held answers. I kept the heater on, letting the warmth chase away the chill in my bones. I finally asked, "You okay?" She shrugged. "Does it ever get easier?" she said. I didn't have an answer. Inside the precinct, the chief had us in his office by morning. He closed the door behind us, lit a cigarette even though no smoking in the building was the rule. Blonde hair, weathered face, he was the only one who dared smoke in there. He leaned forward, looked at both of us. "This is no ordinary killer. I've already alerted the feds. They're sending a team. I want both of you on it." The FBI called the task force Snowman. I remember the bulletin. Interstate homicides, similar MOs in Iowa and Wisconsin, trunk placement. Victims professionally dressed. Evidence of torture, strangulation, suspected serial offender exploiting winter storms. They flew in behavior analysts and homicide specialists. Everything felt like a cleanup operation. Standards, procedures, protocols, but it was too clinical. Snow wasn't blood, but it stuck like blood in our memories. Detective Harrington from Minneapolis joined, said he had a hunch. He dug through cold case files, found 3 bodies from '89 in our area. Victims found in their own sedans after storms, but this time positioned in seats, taped hands. No footprints, no witnesses. He'd never connected the dots, no storm protocols back then, but now he saw the link. We all sat in a big room with maps on the wall, interstate lines drawn in red marker, snow patterns, victim timelines, evidence flows. We placed pins for Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota. It was a constellation of death across winter's vast emptiness. No local media coverage. Officials quietly buried stories to avoid panic. Families believed these were accidents or robberies gone wrong. Nobody mentioned torture or methodical strangulation. I watched the analysts talk about offender profiles. Male, 30s to 40s, likely military or LEO background. Someone with tactical knowledge, evidence handling skills, patience to wait out storms. Someone comfortable in isolation. They theorized he wore a phony uniform, used a stun gun, sought out solo travelers, offered help, earned trust, then abducted them. Overnight interrogations, torture sessions designed to strip away dignity, then the final kill. Snowman team decided to canvass rest stops on storm warning days, set decoys, use undercover units. I volunteered for stakeouts, slept in patrol cars for days. Every time the weather report flashed, major winter system approaching, I felt my chest tighten. I imagined someone else out there, pulling the same moves. I checked trunk latches on my own vehicle before sliding inside at night. I dreamed of tape, cold steel, silent cars. Evidence started trickling in. An off-duty Illinois trooper pulled over a guy with suspicious behavior. Luggage full of duct tape, a police scanner. No victims in his trunk, but his SSN flagged as a former officer. It took days to confirm identity through print comparisons. When they matched him to a nondescript apartment in Carbondale, Illinois, we mobilized. That was the break we'd been waiting for. But we couldn't move too fast. He knew procedures. He'd gone dark. He had false IDs, safe houses. The team coordinated state-to-state warrants, careful surveillance. I was one of the officers in the van outside his door at dawn. Snow was falling again, light flakes that felt too soft for what had happened. They cuffed him before he could disappear. Nathan Blackwood. The name fit poorly, too clean, too innocuous. He smiled as they read rights like he'd been expecting it, but unfazed. I remember the look in his eyes, calm, distant, like he was already on the next storm. In that moment, I realized we hadn't found just a killer. We'd uncovered someone who'd stolen the uniform meant to protect. Someone who weaponized trust. Someone who chose winter storms as accomplices. Someone who laid victims out like exhibits for the cameras that never arrived. I followed the squad car as they drove him away, headlights cutting through the swirl of snow. I watched the back window, the profile of his face. He didn't turn around, didn't plead, didn't mock. He just sat there, patient, waiting for what was next. And I knew there'd be more storms, more victims if he ever got loose again. We piled into a conference room afterward. Blackwood's arrest was big. FBI press release, crisis procedures updated, new training modules. But inside, we felt hollow. I saw Weber staring at the map pins, counting bodies like trophies. I caught her glance, the same thought in both our heads. How many more were out there that we never found? I left that night without saying goodbye. The snow was heavier than before, drifts already knee-high. I climbed into my car, shut the door, locked every latch. The heater sputtered to life. I drove home slower than I'd expected, watching every roadside rest area, every trunk, waiting for something to break the silence. They found his apartment at dawn. I was there when they kicked in the door, ice still clinging to the lock. Inside, it was a shrine to winter storms. Stacks of weather maps pinned to the walls, every forecast marked in red, blue, green. A desk covered in notebooks, pages ripped out and scattered across the floor like dried leaves. A narrow bed in the corner, sheets folded so precisely it looked ceremonial. They cuffed him in the living room. Blackwood's face was calm, almost apologetic. He didn't struggle. He wore a clean uniform shirt, pressed trousers, his own version of a badge and gun belt. I watched him stand there, wrists bound, and felt a hollow pit open in my chest. Someone had stolen that uniform from me. They hauled him outside. A soft snowfall had begun, as if the sky knew to weep. I stayed behind with detectives, rifling through evidence. There was a plastic tote labeled Interrogations. Inside, personal effects from Meyer's trunk. A cufflink, a wallet chain, a strand of hair taped to a page. Under the bed, duct tape rolls, lengths of nylon rope, a stun gun, and a cloth bag with the word clean stenciled on it. It still smelled faintly of disinfectant. In the desk drawer, I found his journal, a leather-bound notebook, the cover scuffed. I opened it and felt like I'd crossed a crime scene. The first entry was dated December 15th, 1991. Storm watch begins. Targeting the affluent traveling alone. Storms strip away privilege. The handwriting was neat. Every letter deliberate, measured. He wrote about staking out rest stops, hours parked in the snow, engine off, heater running so the battery wouldn't die. He noted license plate numbers of cars from big cities, Chicago, Minneapolis, Detroit. He wrote about slipping into a counterfeit uniform, carrying a scanner tuned to police frequencies. He wrote about the thrill of pulling over a traveler. They see the badge. They trust me. I am the help they need. One entry chilled me so badly, my hand shook. January 17th. Found him. Meyer. He fought for 3 days, but by the time blizzard struck, he was broken. Dressed him in his suit, laid him out to let them know who I am. They will feel helpless. Another page described Weber's find. February 2nd, Kraft. He didn't last long. I liked hearing him beg, but I had to hurry, storm closing in. I cleaned him, changed him. I placed him carefully. They will see the pattern this time. He even wrote about the earlier 89 cases in Minneapolis. Bodies found in driver's seats, taped hands, no footprints. Mistakes then. Learn to keep them in trunks, better concealment of tracks. The storm becomes the accomplice. I turned pages until the paper was too brittle to keep going. He detailed every victim, the hours of torture, the surprising gentleness of the final kill, how he'd used the stun gun to break their will, then strangled them when they were too weak to resist. He believed he was delivering justice, exposing men who thought they were untouchable. I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest like a crucifix. I could feel the weight of every story he'd written, every scream he'd broken. And beyond the pages, I felt the emptiness of all the storms yet to come. They loaded evidence into trucks. I stood in the snow and watched the black tote labeled interrogations disappear into the van. I heard the hum of the heater in our squad cars, felt the cold creep past my gloves. I thought of every motorist who'd ever trusted me, and wondered how many of them I'd saved, and how many were left waiting for help that would never come. Back at the station, they set up an interrogation room. I watched through the one-way glass as Blackwood sat across from an agent, lights low, tape recorder clicking. I could hear his voice, measured, calm, as if he were conducting a lecture. He described storms with the reverence most people reserve for gods. He said he never wanted to be the villain, he wanted to be the reckoning. I went home that night and found my uniform hanging in the closet. I ran my hand over the badge. I wanted to rip it off. I wanted to burn every piece of evidence of my service, but I couldn't. It had protected lives as well as taken them. I dreamed of a man in a storm, eyes wide, begging for mercy that never came. I woke up and felt snowflakes on my face, even though it was July. I told myself it was just a dream. I told myself the storm had ended, but it hadn't. I went back to the office and watched as the snowman files grew. 30 bodies, 40, 15 confirmed in court, others still missing, still counted as accidents or traffic fatalities. Every cold night I check my trunk latch twice. Every storm alert, I dial dispatch to verify the officer's code before pulling over. I read the journal's pages when I can't sleep, tracing his words, looking for signs I missed. I see his handwriting in every snowfall's hush. I hear his promises in the wind that rattles my windows. He's gone to prison, locked away, but storms still come. I carry a piece of that notebook in my coat pocket. I read it under street lamps on lonely highways, feeling every tremor of his pen across the page. I know what happens when we trust too easily. I know the cost of silence. I finished the journal at dawn, closing the cover on the last page. They will fear the storm. They will fear me. I let it fall into my lap and watched the words become snowflakes drifting away. The trial opened in early September 1992. Courtroom. A was crowded. Prosecutors, defense, dozens of family members wrapped in winter coats. Even a handful of reporters camped outside to catch any detail they could. I sat in the back row, badge tucked under my jacket, watching Blackwood move with a strange grace past the jury box. He was still wearing that crisp uniform shirt, his nameplate missing, sleeves buttoned at the cuff like a gentleman's. Opening statements laid out the snowman killings. 15 confirmed victims, each discovered in a trunk during blizzards from Iowa to Michigan. 3 earlier bodies in Minneapolis dating to 1989. The prosecutor's voice was calm, methodical. He described duct tape impressions, stun gun burns, the precise positions of bodies, and the clean clothes placed on them afterward. He spoke of the terror fixed in their eyes. I felt sweat bead on my forehead, even though my hands were buried in my lap. The defense tried insanity. They brought in childhood psychologists who testified about Blackwood's abusive father, a drill sergeant who beat lessons into him. They showed psychiatric evaluations claiming severe personality disorders, impulse control issues. But by then, jurors had already seen the journal entries, handwritten confessions of meticulous planning, a narrative in Blackwood's own voice describing delivering justice and stripping privilege. I was called to the stand on day 7. I walked up in a dark suit, away from the uniform I wore on the night we found Meyer. The judge's gavel echoed as I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked about the first discovery, how I found Meyer, what I saw, how I reacted. I described the stifling silence behind that open trunk, how the wind had gone still when the lid cracked open, how I knew in that moment that this wasn't an accident. I spoke of the investigation's evolution, the second and third finds, the mapping of storm tracks, the painstaking cross-state coordination. I talked about Detective Harrington's cold case breakthrough, the Illinois traffic stop, the seized duct tape and scanner. I recalled the day they hauled Blackwood out in cuffs, the snowfall at dawn, the silent relief mingled with dread that he might have had more victims we'd never find. Every word felt like admission of failure and perseverance at once. Failure that someone had worn my badge to murder. Perseverance that we'd stopped him. I ended by saying I was proud of the work we did, but I'll never forget that I couldn't save them. Not Richard Meyer, not Thomas Kraft, not Douglas Freeman, not any of them. Cross-examination was brief. The defense lawyer asked if I'd ever considered planting evidence, if I'd risked my career to be first on scene. His tone was thinly veiled accusation. I stared at him, and my voice didn't waver. No. I followed procedure. I found a man in a trunk. I secured evidence. I reported what I saw. The evidence spoke for itself. Closing arguments came 2 days later. The prosecutor's voice cracked when he recounted letters from victims' families, children begging, widows pleading for justice. He showed photographs of Meyer's parents, arms linked as they wept in the snow at a memorial. He reminded jurors that Blackwood had shown no mercy, and that each life he took had meaning for someone still alive. The defense urged compassion, asked the jury to see Blackwood's humanity. But jurors had seen the journal passages, watched me testify to that final entry. They will fear the storm. They will fear me. Even the judge acknowledged the premeditation and cold brutality. On November 12, 1992, the jury returned after 6 hours of deliberation, guilty on all counts. I felt a weight lift and settle at the same time. The verdict led to an automatic hearing. Blackwood was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms without parole. The room was silent as the judge spoke his name, pronounced him a danger to society, a predator who'd betrayed every ounce of trust in his uniform. Afterward, families filed into the hallway, hugging, crying. I stood back, letting them grieve. A woman approached me. Hers was the case from Minneapolis, '89, a victim never publicly connected until now. She held out a faded photo of her husband. "Thank you," she said softly. I didn't know what to say beyond, "I'm sorry it took so long." In the months that followed, state patrol agencies across the Midwest revised storm response protocols, verification codes for bad weather traffic stops, mandatory trunk checks whenever a vehicle is abandoned, crisis response training for officers to spot predators exploiting emergencies. My name was on some of those memos, but the changes felt hollow. I kept checking storm forecasts like a vigilante. Every wind advisory made me itch to throw on my coat and flashlight, to go back to mile marker 239 and see if the sedan was waiting for me again. 6 months later, I requested transfer to administrative duty. I couldn't face another winter on patrol. Even in the station corridors, I recoiled when I saw someone in uniform. I flinched at the crackle of a radio. I saw Blackwood's handwriting in the margin of every weather report. Years later, I was asked to lecture at the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. They showed slides of trunk impressions, tape patterns, excerpts from the journal. I heard analysts discuss how predators can weaponize authority, but I was only half there, my mind always at that roadside in the storm, where a man sat curled in a trunk, eyes trapped in silent accusation. If you ask me what I learned, I'd say this: promise hangers and verification codes can't fix betrayal. Trust is fragile in the cold. Silence is easier, but mercy demands words. And storms don't kill people. You do if you let your uniform blind you to fear in a stranger's eyes. The verdict didn't change the nights that followed. I was still haunted by snowdrifts and empty trunks. I left the courtroom knowing Blackwood would never walk free, but I also knew I carried him with me, every place a storm could hit. I handed in my uniform and badge a few weeks after the sentencing, citing medical reasons. They didn't press. Everyone understood what I'd been through. My nights rotated to desk duty, pauper work, training sessions, lectures at the academy, and once at Quantico for the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. They wanted me to teach new recruits about the danger of imposters, the importance of verification codes, the red flags of predatory routines. I told them what I saw in Blackwood's apartment. He tracked storms like some people track prey. He studied human nature more closely than any therapist I've met, and he recorded our own procedures better than we did. He knew exactly how to exploit the cracks in our trust. They listened with rapt attention, scribbling notes, but I felt like I was describing someone else's life, not mine. I never fully admitted I felt responsible, that I too had driven past stranded motorists in whiteout conditions because I had things to do. I never said how. After finding Meyer, I'd wondered if I could have saved him if I'd left my dinner early, if I'd turned my car around sooner. My dreams were restless. I saw snowflakes swirling in a silent room, a trunk lid rising in slow motion. A man in a suit, eyes unblinking, mouth taped, staring at me as if accusing me of waiting, just like Blackwood wrote in his journal. They will feel how it is to wait. I'd wake up choking on my own breath, blanket twisted around my legs as if I'd just climbed out of a ditch. I began checking my own trunk every time I drove home. I'd click the latch, pull it open, peek inside the cargo area where only spare tires and emergency kits lived. I'd shut it again, heart pounding, If I didn't do it, I felt like Blackwood himself might sneak inside and leave me there, someone finally turning tables on the hunter. Spring came, and with it a thaw that should have felt like relief. Instead, melting snow revealed slush and grit, rusty edges on guardrails, shards of ice perched where no one saw them. Every dripping gutter sounded like water filling a trunk. I got so jumpy that even the sound of a car door closing too loudly made me jump out of my seat. I kept in touch with Weber. She stayed on patrol for one more winter, then switched to K9 unit. She said the dogs helped. They smelled fear in everything, pulled her focus away from maps and patterns. We didn't talk much about the bodies. More often, she'd call to say, "Did you catch that weather update? They're saying another system's coming in from the Rockies." I'd reply, "Yeah." 3-inch snow expected by midnight, like I was still on duty. We'd hang up quickly, both of us listening for footsteps, for the howl of wind. Families of the victims reached out over the years. I'd receive letters on anniversary dates: January 17th, February 2nd, February 24th. Small cards with black ribbons, photos of someone smiling by a lake, someone in a suit on a sales trip, someone standing beside a tractor in Iowa. They all ended with, "Thank you for finding him," or "I'm glad he's not forgotten." Those words warmed me briefly, then burned me with guilt. Forgotten? I'd never stop remembering. I buried myself in work when another winter approached. The agency asked me to review storm response procedures again. I sat in a room with high-definition screens showing looped footage from dash cams, officers pulling over motorists, code verifications displayed on screen, trunk inspection checklists flashing at the bottom of the feed. Everything was overkill, more layers of safety, but I watched every video as if I expected to see Blackwood's silhouette emerge from the snow, flashlight beam cutting through the whiteout to reveal him standing there, finger poised on a trunk latch. In December 1993, a rookie trooper found a sedan at mile marker 239. Same stretch of I-80. He called it in as per protocol, then called for a trunk check. Inside was a deer carcass tangled in fishing line, nothing more sinister. He sighed relief over the radio. I listened from the station, heard the tension drain from his voice, and I realized some part of me still held its breath, waiting for something worse. That night, I dreamed of the trunk lid creaking open on its own, as if powered by the wind. I heard a voice, a whisper meant for icy fields. I still have work to do. I woke up to my own tears on the pillow. Eventually, I retired completely. I moved to a small town miles from any interstate, where snow rarely fell and drifts were a memory. I drove a different car. I still check the trunk, but only for groceries now. I don't wear a uniform, I don't carry a weapon. I answer to no dispatch. But storms still come, and whenever they do, I feel it in the air. The promise of white covering everything, erasing tracks, hiding intentions. Last winter, I got a letter, no return address, just the name NB printed in block letters. Inside was a single page torn from a notebook, lines of handwriting I recognized too well. Snow returns each year. I return with it. There was no signature, no further explanation. The paper was scorched at the edges, as if it had been in a fire. I put it in a frame and hung it on my wall. Now, whenever the sky darkens and clouds gather, I find myself staring at that page, listening for the hush before the wind. I learned that you can't outrun your own cold nights. You can't lock away the past in evidence rooms, seal it in court documents, swing it or hide it in filed reports. Silence never kept the storm at bay. The only way to stay safe is to keep listening to the quiet, to the unfelt tremor beneath every flake of snow, and to remember that trust, once broken, echoes forever. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is still, I swear I can hear him whisper through the drift, a promise carried on the wind. I'll be back with the next storm. I stopped counting years after I handed in my badge. Time became a blur of afternoons where the sun hit the pavement so hard I could almost forget the cold. But winter always came back, steady as a heartbeat. First a light dusting, then sheets of white, then the howl of wind that made you pull your collar tighter and stare at the sky as if willing the storm to pass you by. I still lived in a town with 2-lane roads and no highway patrol station, convinced that distance might keep the worst at bay. I was wrong. It began with the call from Weber. She'd moved to the K9 unit, partnering with a German shepherd named Victor, who smelled fear better than any skeptic doubting a trunk check. She sounded breathless, and for a moment I thought she was out in a blizzard again. But this was midsummer. No storm forecast at all. She said simply, "Clausen, I need you to come in." I drove the long stretch to her precinct, the roads empty, the fields golden with harvest. When I arrived, the air smelled of rain and dust. Weber met me in the lot, hair damp under her patrol cap, uniform pressed but eyes rimmed in dark circles. Victor sat at her side, ears pricked, head tilted in that way he had when he sensed something off. "We found one today," she said quietly. "Checked a sedan on an abandoned county road. Routine. Driver says he broke down, but the VIN didn't match." She nodded toward Victor, who sat staring at me as if he knew more than any of us wanted to admit. "Trunk was locked," she continued. "Had to break it open." I felt my throat tighten. 2 decades of checking strangers' trunks, trusting protocols, believing we'd sealed every crack in the system. Now, the past banged at my chest like a frantic prisoner begging for release. Weber motioned to the rear of her SUV and lifted the tarp. Inside, wrapped in a faded quilt of blues and grays, lay a body. She said the name in a whisper I could have missed. Janice R. Jenkins, therapist from Des Moines, reported missing 5 days ago. A crack of color seeped through the patchwork covering. Her purse still on its strap, beads on her wallet chain glittering in the dusk light. I could see her shoes, lacquered and tidy, pointed like someone who walked corridors, not haunted fields. Her hands were bound at the wrists with tape that had once been white, now a ragged brown stripe across her skin. I knelt beside the SUV, pressed my gloved hand to the quilt. She'd been beaten, left bruises black and green across her arms and neck. The quilt smelled faintly of lavender, perhaps her own, perhaps a cruel touch by someone who knew her routines. I felt a thunderbolt of guilt spike through my chest. I'd thought the arrest of Blackwood meant the storms and bodies stopped. I'd closed my trunk check routine, traded it for desk work, for teaching classes where I lectured on trust and verification codes. But here we were, bodies still turning up, storms not required to conceal terror. Weber's radio crackled. The coroner's team was en route. We set up cones, flashlights aimed at the open trunk. Victor sniffed around the rear bumper, lowering his head, tail stiff. I watched him to see if he might start barking, but he only whined once, low in his throat. Then he nudged my elbow, head turned to the quilted body. I nodded. He smelled death in a place death shouldn't have been. They arrived swiftly. The coroner's van doors swung open, and technicians moved with practiced solemnity, sliding out stretchers, snapping latex gloves over their hands. I stepped aside and let them work, but I couldn't tear my eyes from her face, even under the quilt. Jenkins had once sat across from them, offering calm and guidance. Now she was a victim in a pattern I was wrong to think we stopped. Inside the precinct, they laid her out on an examination table, lifted the quilt, and found the journal. Brown leather, frayed corners, pages marked with dates and incisions of text in tight cursive. They recognized it immediately. So did I. Not Blackwood's handwriting, but style and obsession echoed something I'd seen before. They called me in to identify it. I opened the cover, and there, in careful block letters, was her name, Janice R. Jenkins. And beneath that, in the same hand, "This is for silence." The page opposite was blank, but every edge was dog-eared, as if someone wanted to remember more than one sentence at a time. I swallowed. This wasn't Blackwood. The way she wrote felt different. Feminine loops that tightened into agitated knots as I turned pages. There were entries, details of a clinic in rural Iowa, sessions with a high-profile client whose initials matched a name only whispered in gossip, notes about a storm watcher who offered rides, a kind face in a uniform. But then the storm would never come. Her notes said so. She wrote about being careful, taking appointments in the daytime, seeing a familiar patrol car outside her practice. She noted the officer's badge number, the way he frowned when she mentioned therapy for law enforcement stress. I felt a tremor in my thigh, like a rifle butt against my leg. That badge number was one I recognized from a decade ago as inactive, transferred out. The same clerical code used to bury Blackwood's files. And there it was, in her handwriting. He watches the storms. I watch him. Soon his secrets will be buried in mine. Weber laid a hand on my shoulder, eyes wet under the harsh fluorescent lights. "This pattern," she said, voice breaking. It never stopped. My mind went back to the day we found Blackwood's journal, the way he'd written about choosing victims in storms, calling them privileged and untouchable, feeding them to the ice until the world believed they'd perished in the cold. But Jenkins's journal turned that logic inside out. She hunted him down, keeping records, waiting for the right moment. She'd used her sessions to learn his fears, his routines. She'd turned the game against him, bound him, and left him in the trunk of his own car, marked it as her evidence. The coroner peeled the quilt back for photographs. Jenkins's face was calm, eyes closed, a slight curve to her lips, as if she'd found peace before the end. They snapped pictures. I tried not to blink. Then they bagged the journal and loaded her body into the van. We stood outside the precinct as the van pulled away into the night. Weber closed her squad car door and sat for a long moment. Victor lying by her feet, ears flicking at each passing engine. I leaned against the hood of my car, the weight of my badge still heavy in my pocket. The air smelled of asphalt and approaching rain, not snow. Weber said finally, "They'll come for the journal now. Forensics, feds, whoever. They'll see it's not Blackwood's writing, but they'll connect the dots. They'll see Jenkins's name, and they'll realize she did what none of us could." I looked at her and felt something cold settle inside. "She knew the storms weren't necessary," I said. "She learned our system, our patterns. She broke them against his head." I unlocked my car and sat inside, hands trembling on the wheel. The dashboard lights glowed softly. I thought of every stranded motorist I'd ever ignored because the storm didn't look bad enough. I thought of every day when I'd told myself that only the worst storms hid the worst criminals. Now I knew that terror could appear any time, in any weather, and hiding in plain sight was the deadliest trick of all. I reached into my pocket, drew out Blackwood's burnt notebook page. Snow returns each year. I return with it. Jenkins's journal would replace it soon, but this scrap was the only proof I had that I'd never escaped the snowman's shadow. I tucked it under my steering wheel and closed my eyes. When I did, I saw Jenkins's face one last time. Eyes peaceful, lips curved in a secret smile. I knew her storm was over, but I realized mine never would be. We found Jenkins's car at dusk, miles off the county line on a gravel road that dead ends at an abandoned farmstead. She'd been missing 5 days. Her last appointment note read July 12, 2005, 3 p.m. with client M.R. in rural Polk County. The day was unseasonably hot. Humidity clung to the air like a damp blanket. No storms in the forecast, just the distant rumble of tractor engines and cicadas. I was with Weber, who now wore a subdued silver badge in honor of her canine partner Victor's service retirement. She drove an unmarked Crown Vic. I followed in my old cruiser, no decals, only the worn paint and hidden lights. We'd been chasing down a tip, an anonymous call reporting a SUV at that dead-end road, hood up, no lights, doors locked. When we arrived, the sun was slipping below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purple and orange. Jenkins' vehicle stood half in grass, half on gravel. The engine hood was propped open. Steam drifted into the air. There was no skid mark, no sign of crash, just smoke rising like a signal flare. Weber flipped on her flashlight and walked around the front. "She didn't hit anything," she said softly. "No front-end damage." She tapped the hood. It banged like hollow metal. I circled the back. The trunk seam looked unbroken, paint clean. "Let's do this by the book," I whispered. Weber nodded and called dispatch. "We have a disabled vehicle, requesting tow and coroner check, over." She clicked her pen light off and on, like a metronome slowing down. We approached the driver's door. It was locked. Weber popped the lock with a Slim Jim, first. Time I'd seen her do that without hesitation. The window rolled down a crack, shattered glass on the seat. She got in, peered at the ignition. No key. She muttered she couldn't have locked herself. I knelt at the passenger side and listened. Inside, the heater fan whirred. The cab smelled like lavender and antiseptic wipes, a clinic room in the middle of nowhere. I tapped the seat. No movement. Then I saw blood spatters on the headliner, small droplets like overzealous spray. I pointed to the trunk latch. Weber's light beam followed. She flipped the latch open. The trunk popped, revealing a quilted blanket tucked neatly as if someone had tried to preserve dignity. She lifted the blanket's edge. Underneath lay Janice Jenkins, face up, arms folded across her chest. She wore a pale blouse, pressed slacks, her professional attire. A leather journal rested on her chest. Her face was serene, as though she slept in a field of lavender blossoms. Her wrists were bound with coarse tape, the edges jagged. Black and blue bruises edged her neck. A single white daisy lay atop her sternum, petals unblemished. I swallowed hard, voice thick. "This isn't a murder scene, it's a statement." Weber reached in carefully and lifted the journal. It was a compact, leather-bound book, the cover embossed with initials J.R.J. She passed it to me through the gap. I felt its weight, heavier than any notebook I'd carried. I cracked it open to the first page. Neat handwriting, loops and flourishes. Not Blackwood's clinical scrawl, but something more urgent, more personal. I read, July 5th, I began tracking him. Watching storms wasn't enough. He had to feel watched. M.R. was the last to speak truth to him. Now he answers to me. I closed the journal, heart pounding. Weber said, "Read it all. He's not the only predator we're hunting." She radioed dispatch to secure the scene. We stepped back as the coroner's van pulled up, technicians unloading gear. They zipped Jenkins into a body bag with the quilt and journal as evidence. They photographed her under the dimming sky, flashbulbs popping like distant gunshots. I watched Jenkins' face beneath the bag, peaceful, almost triumphant. At the station, we sequestered the journal and blanket in evidence lockers. Weber and I sat in the briefing room under fluorescent glare. Jenkins's file lay open on the table. Missing person report, appointment logs, client initials. MR matched rumor names. Famous in state politics, never publicly linked. Jenkins's session notes had disappeared from the clinic safe after her vanishing. We sorted through her pages. She documented phone conversations, coded references to badge numbers. She tracked an officer's pattern, badge 452, Trooper Clausen, my old ID. She'd woven herself into Blackwood's narrative, turning his tactics against him. She wrote of personal sessions with MR, therapy breakthroughs, betrayal, frustration. Then she described stalking her stalker. He hunts storms. I hunt him. I'll expose every secret until he trembles. It was more than a case. It was confession and revenge in one. Jenkins's notes showed she'd researched me, my transfer history, my seasonal patrols. She'd broken me from the inside, learned how I froze at every trunk. Then she prepared her own scene, a therapist's trunk, not a storm's. Weber said, "She taught us how to hunt. She used our trust protocols against us." I nodded, feeling the walls close in. Jenkins's betrayal cut deeper because she'd once offered healing, listened to fears. Later that night, I drove to the abandoned farmstead again. The moon was a sliver. I parked where I'd found the SUV, stood on the gravel, and stared at the farmhouse silhouette. The wind whispered through broken window panes. I imagined Jenkins there, pen in hand, charting our routines on weathered maps. I imagined Blackwood, bound in a quilt, snowflakes falling silent onto his hooded head. I pulled out Blackwood's charred notebook scrap. Snow returns each year. I return with it. I held Jenkins' journal in my other hand. 2 books of obsession, 2 victims turned avengers. I felt both gratitude and dread. Jenkins had stopped a killer, but unleashed something far more insidious. The idea that anyone could weaponize trust. I slipped both into my coat pocket. The journals would be forensics fodder, but the real evidence lived in my mind. The proof that terror could wear any face, any uniform, any posture of help. I got in my car and drove away, headlights cutting arcs in the night. The next morning, dispatch codes were updated again. New verification steps for civilian assistance calls, behind-the-scenes checks for therapist offices. But Jenkins' lesson would echo in us long after paperwork filed and training videos produced. It lived in Weber's cautious glances at every civilian uniform encounter, in my habit of rifling cabin doors before sitting down, in Victor's restless pacing whenever a stranger approached. I still feel it whenever I open a trunk. Muscle memory from 2 decades of snowstorms, from Jenkins's final scene and Blackwood's pages. Every latch click is a question. Who's inside? Are they begging for help or baiting someone desperate enough to open up again? That night, I lay in a cheap motel bed, windows cracked to hear midnight traffic and distant thunder. I thought of Jenkins's peaceful face under the quilt and her final words in that journal. "He will see me in every storm." I recited her line aloud, then closed my eyes, and just before sleep took me, I whispered to the dark, "There's always another trunk to check." It was March 2007 when the Portland Police Bureau brought me in to review the new forensic photographer's work. I'd been retired less than a year, but my reputation for quietly chasing down internal irregularities had followed me into consulting. They said Elliot Marsh was a standout. 15 years photographing homicide scenes for Seattle PD, razor-sharp images that helped win convictions. They expected praise, not suspicion. I saw the file and the photographs together. Film strips laid end to end on a light table in the basement dark room. Red tape sealing every cabinet door. The place smelled of fixer and old plaster. They let him keep the room locked at all times. I flipped through roll after roll. Bedrooms where bodies lay stiff and broken. Living rooms turned inside out. Marsh angled his Hasselblad to pick up the smallest details. A single shoe by a blood spatter. A jagged hole in a window frame. Then I noticed it. A dark mass clinging to the corner of a photo, like a stain in the emulsion. At first, I thought it was an ash spot or developer drip, but it reappeared in each frame of the Crowley homicide. 3 shots taken seconds apart. The shape shifted, leaning forward in the first image, retreating slightly in the next. It never matched any officer's silhouette or the victim's own outline. I pulled the originals off the light table and carried them upstairs to Detective Sarah Linden's office. She sat behind a cluttered desk, case files stacked like leaning towers. "Look at this," I said softly, dropping the photos in front of her. She peered through a magnifier at the corner of the image, brow furrowing. "Looks like a reflection," she said, but her tone was cautious. No one wants to admit uncertainty in homicide. I told her I'd seen the same in Marsh's Seattle files. Unsolved cases where the shadows were noted in passing but never explained. She closed her eyes, pinched the bridge of her nose. "He's one of our best," she said. "He sees things we miss." From there, it got worse. I reviewed Seattle's clearance rates and found 17 unsolved homicides Marsh had touched. In each, someone had scribbled a note. Possible anomaly. Shadows. No follow-up. In Portland, they'd celebrated his arrival with a ceremony in the briefing room. I imagined him standing on that dais, camera hanging from his neck, spotless uniform, eyes scanning the crowd like he already knew where all the secrets were hidden. I spent the next week re-examining every print Marsh had made since March. In half a dozen, the anomalies were faint, smudges that could easily be dismissed. In others, they were undeniable. Head and shoulder profiles, crouching forms, shapes that suggested someone watching the victim even after death. The air in the dark room grew heavy, as if the shadows clung to my clothes. I brought my findings to Lieutenant Robert Chen in Internal Affairs. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and stared at the photos pinned to his corkboard. "You're saying Marsh staged evidence?" he asked. I shook my head. "Number, I'm saying he manipulated development. Chemicals. He probably doctored the negatives." He tapped a finger on the desk. "If true, that undermines dozens of cases." He sounded more intrigued than outraged. "And you want me to open a covert investigation?" I nodded. "Discreet. We can't spook the brass." They scheduled a search warrant for Marsh's darkroom on his day off. 2 sergeants and I went down the narrow back stairwell, past the old boiler and peeling paint. We didn't announce ourselves. The door swung open under our key. Inside, the fixer trays sat undisturbed. Film reels organized by date. I spotted a floor panel lifted slightly in one corner. Underneath, a handwritten journal bound in black leather. Page after page described the witnesses Marsh captured, those who lingered at crime scenes. He wrote of chemical additives that heightened spectral clarity. He named compounds I recognized from toxicology reports, substances that could trigger hallucinations if handled improperly. In the back cabinet, under a false bottom, we found personal items: a single earring, a child's hair ribbon, a man's wedding band, and nothing logged in evidence. Next to each, a photograph pinned with red markers circling the anomaly. I held the child's ribbon in my gloved hand. How many times had I seen a similar ribbon swept into a biohazard bag never to be catalogued. Marsh had stolen evidence, trophies, I thought. We closed up and sat in the interrogation room. Hours later, Marsh didn't show. No calls. His apartment, just a block from the station, was empty. No notes, no luggage. Camera equipment still in the darkroom. It was as if he vanished into the shadows he'd spent months refining on film. I stayed behind after the scene was cleared. Monitors flickered, sepia prints washed in chemical haze. I looked at those photographs, each one bearing the weight of untold stories. The forms in the corners, were they hallucinations he'd crafted, or something more? I didn't believe in ghosts, but after staring at those frames for days, I wondered if the lens could capture things our eyes would never see. Long after everyone left, I walked out into the empty station, my footsteps echoing down the corridors. Somewhere out there, Marsh was watching through a viewfinder, or maybe he already knew the camera would never find him again. But those images remained. Frozen moments of light and shadow, unanswered questions hiding in plain sight, and I couldn't let them go. My retirement had been peaceful until Marsh. Now I'm haunted by film negatives and chemical stains, by the idea that a man could manipulate truth so completely. I keep those prints locked in my desk drawer. I've shown them to only 2 people, Lyndon and Chen. They look away quickly, afraid of what they might admit they believe. But I think about those shadows every night. I think about the lives lost and how someone stole pieces of their final moments. And I wonder what lingers in the dark after we turn away. I couldn't sleep that night. My lamp burned low on the kitchen table. Photographs spread across the countertop like a morbid mosaic. I traced the edge of the Crowley image with my fingertip, the grain of the film rough beneath my glove. In the corner, the shadow crouched, an unnatural stillness that felt too precise. I remembered the first time I'd held a camera in my hand, decades ago, capturing a battered patrol car at a wrecked intersection. Back then, I thought a photograph was proof. Now, I wasn't so sure. I called Lyndon before dawn. Her voice sounded cramped through the phone, like she'd been holding her breath. I checked the inventory logs, she said. Those items Marsh stowed, they belonged to Crowley's victim and 2 others from Seattle. She paused, throat clearing. No one noticed until you mentioned it. Guilt settled in my chest. How many times had I passed over a stray bracelet or a loose earring at a scene? How many pieces of evidence had washed down the drain with fixer fluid? We met in the station parking lot, where the glow of street lamps carved long shadows across the asphalt. Lyndon wore her jacket zipped high, collar turned up against the cold. She slipped a print into my hand, an enlarged shot of the earring beside the shadow's outline. He circled them in red ink, she said, like a hunter marking trophies. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The silence felt full, as if Marsh's presence still lingered in the clipped night air. Back inside, the station felt different. Empty corridors echoing with the ghosts of evidence and questions. I climbed the stairs to the roof, pushing open the hatch. Portland's skyline glittered under a thin haze of fog. Somewhere below, Marsh's locker stood empty, a single key dangling from the lock. I flicked it closed against the wind. One key to rule them all, control over every image, every story locked away. I remembered Chen's words when I first brought the anomalies to him. "You're sure it's not lab contamination?" He looked at me with those calculating eyes, weighing risk over truth. I'd lied then, said I wasn't certain, but I knew. You learn quick in internal investigations that absolute certainty is rare. You work with probability, with patterns that plague you, until you'll die wondering if you missed something. In the following days, I dug into Marsh's past. The Resti thesis, filed under experimental media, read like a confession. He wrote of energizing the silver halide crystals, coaxing out impressions he called residual vibrations of trauma. He described mixing scopolamine into his developer, a dosage small enough to be undetectable on standard assays but potent enough to alter perception. His notes claimed it sharpened the lens to a different frequency, one he suggested resonated with emotional imprints. I read it twice, expecting a punchline or a scholarly critique, found none. I reached out to a chemist friend under cover of Dead Case Review. She ran a sample from the fixer bath Marsh left behind. The results came back with a footnote. Trace alkaloids consistent with nightshade derivatives. I dropped the report on Chen's desk mid-morning. He scanned the pages, eyes flicking over HPLC numbers and chemical structures. "This confirms manipulation," he said. "But does it explain the shapes?" He tapped the report folder. "Or does it simply make us more willing to see them?" That question haunted me. I slept less and walked the beat again, just once, to feel the rhythm of city streets, the hollow concrete of alleyways lit by sodium lamps. I snapped photos with my cell phone, testing angles and shadows. In every frame, faces emerged where none stood, corners clicked into sharp relief. Human psychology, I realized, could be as much a dark room as any basement full of fixer and fixer trays. When news of Marsh's disappearance broke, it stayed internecine, protected from press release. No headlines, no leaked memos. The Bureau's public statement called it a personnel matter. They reassured the community that their cases remained secure, that all evidence had been double-checked. I watched locals shrug and move on. They wanted certainty, plain answers. They deserved better, but we couldn't give it to them. Trial lawyers filed motions to review Marsh-related evidence in Seattle and Portland. I read the filings with shaky hands. Defense counsel seized on every hint of chemical tampering, every ambiguous note about shadows. Cases that once rested on clear photographic proof now dangled in uncertainty. Some families welcomed the scrutiny, hoping for a chance at retrial, at uncovering what might have been overlooked. Others recoiled, furious that their final moments were under the lens again. Linden transferred to a cold case unit after all the motions settled. She asked me to join her on one unsolved file, the Alan Carter disappearance from 2005. Marsh had photographed Carter's lakeside cabin once, claimed it was a routine periphery shot. I opened the envelope he'd left behind and found the print. Carter's open door, a chair tipped over, stains on the floor that no blood test confirmed. In the far corner, almost blending into the dusk outside the window, the silhouette of a man stood watch. We booked a trip to Lake Oswego. The cabin was gone, razed years ago. The land returned to reeds and sunlit grass. No trace remained of Carter's final night. I stood on the shore where he might have walked out to meet the lake's edge. I held Marsh's photograph in my gloved hand, felt the film's rigid frame slide against my palm. The shadow in that image seemed alive, as if someone were breathing behind me. I turned. Nothing but the wind and the lapping water. Out here, far from flashing lights and uniformed guards, I felt the weight of silence pressing in, like the still air after an execution. The kind of quiet that sculpts your thoughts, carves out confusion until only a hollow remains. I knew then what Marsh had known. There are witnesses no one else hears, shapes no one else sees, until someone points a camera lens and forces them into the light. Back in Portland, I locked the Carter photo in the same drawer with the Crowley prints. I slipped a piece of paper between them, a note that read, "Proof is what we make of silence." I wrote it longhand in my own scrawl, as if to remind myself I still had control over the narrative. I'll keep these images safe, for as long as they let me. Maybe one day someone will demand answers. Until then, I carry them like talismans against forgetfulness. A testament that sometimes the darkest truths are caught on film, and sometimes the man behind the lens decides which truths the world deserves to see. I kept the Carter print taped to my office wall for weeks, staring at that shadowed figure until the edges blurred. The Bureau never officially closed the internal inquiry. They let it fade, buried under new cases and PR memos. Marsh's name never made headlines, but inside those walls it became a whispered warning. By spring, I was digging through cold files again, this time on a case from late 2003 at a private clinic just outside Seattle. A well-known actor, initials J.D., entered rehab for exhaustion and left less than 24 hours later in a padded room under guard. The official report said no foul play. His manager paid hush money to keep tabloids off the scent, but clandestine logs showed 2 officers were called in for disturbance control. No details. The clinic's security tapes never surfaced. Marsh photographed J.D.'s room before and after. The first roll showed J.D.'s empty bed at dawn, pale sheets snagged on the rails. In the corner, under a dim wall sconce, a dark outline crouched, hands drawn close to its chest. Seconds later, another frame captured that shape leaning over the bed, almost touching the mattress. A final shot showed the outline gone, but the sheets were knotted, as if something heavy had pulled them tight. Lyndon and I flew to Seattle on a private warrant. The clinic was gone, razed, volunteers told us, after a fire in '05. But the soil samples beneath the ruins still held traces of fixer chemicals Marsh had used. I remembered his thesis line: to reveal the residue of trauma, one must soak the ground itself in the telltale compounds. An environmental team dug beneath the concrete, and we found a shard of film, distorted and burned at the edges, but you could still see the bed springs and an armchair turned on its back. The shadow was there, half lifted off the floor. I traced J.D.'s manager to a beachfront estate in Malibu. He welcomed us in a long corridor lit by recessed lights. Portraits of the actor lined the walls, smiling at premieres, awards nights. I showed him the stills. He didn't flinch. "I paid Marsh to photograph anything unusual," he said flatly. "He did." He sipped his whiskey, gaze steady. "Then I paid him more to vanish." He slid a ledger across the marble tabletop. Records of wire transfers beneath transactions labeled Film Development Retainer. 7 figures, recurring every 2 weeks from 2003 to 2007. No invoices, just cryptic references. Exposure. Fixer. Repeat sessions. I thought of the families of Marsh's victims, how often the killer or scene tamer paid hush money so no one would ask questions. It was the same here. The actor paid to keep something hidden, then to hide the photographer who knew too much. I left the estate under a blood-red sunset. The Pacific glowed like molten metal as I drove back to my rental. I thought about the outline in that Malibu frame, an outline too solid to be a trick of light. It crouched at the edge of J.D.'s bed, waiting for the darkness to settle in. I imagined the actor pacing behind that shape, watching himself sleep, watched by Marsh's camera through a lens tainted with hallucinogen. I felt the pull of guilt. How often I filed cases and moved on. How often the truth got retitled Natural Causes or Accidental Discharge. When I returned to Portland, Internal Affairs had compiled a dossier on that 2003 assignment. They named it Operation Shadowcatcher. They concluded Marsh had accepted money from at least 3 high-profile clients: families, agents, managers, anyone who preferred secrets to stay secret. The Bureau quietly passed the information to the FBI and the district attorney. But by then, Marsh was a ghost. No known addresses, no calls, no trace beyond a series of film reels hidden in unmarked boxes in an abandoned airstrip hangar near Vancouver, Washington, where federal agents later found over 100 rolls, all blank. Late one evening, I walked past the hangar on my way home. Chain-link gate swung open, hinges creaking in the wind. A faded sign read, "Portland PD, Aircraft Maintenance." I pushed inside. The hangar stretched wide under a corrugated roof. Dust motes hung in the air like drifting embers. I expected boxes. Instead, the far wall was covered with framed prints. Marsh's photographs, enlarged and mounted in rows. Crowley's apartment, the lakeside cabin, the actor's padded room. Each image had a shadow in the corner, circled in blood-red marker, labeled with dates and initials. CC, Crowley, AC, Alan Carter, JD, the actor. Underneath each print, a small desk lamp had been wired to flicker, projecting a shaky glow on the wall as if the shadows were alive. I staggered back, heart hammering. My footsteps echoed. The photos seemed to pulse as the lamps sputtered, corners of the prints curling, emulsion cracking. I thought I saw movement just beyond my vision, a crouching figure watching me. I spun around, nothing, just silence. Then the gate clanged closed behind me. I didn't call for backup. I didn't take photos or list evidence. I slipped out through a side door, leaving those prints to hang in the dark. I figured if Marsh ever returned, he'd want his work intact. If he hunted me, I didn't want to give him any more trails to follow. Now, I file the final documents under unresolved. I annotate each with a reference to ghost protocols, an internal nod to the things we saw but can't prove. I know some are lab artifacts, chemical residues, pareidolia, my old nemesis. I know others defy logic. I've learned to live with both truths. I hang the JD print in the stairwell of my home office, right above the Carter photo. The actor's bed appears empty, sheets untucked, but the shadow hovers. Shoulders hunched, head bowed, watching me. I catch its shape in my peripheral vision. A quiet presence dims the room. I still carry Marsh's key in my jacket pocket. Sometimes I insert it into the lock of my filing cabinet as a reminder that any lock can be picked. Evidence doesn't vanish. It just waits for the right light. And every so often I hear a soft click behind me in the dark, as if a camera shutter has snapped. The film catches nuance, but the question remains. Did Marsh bring those shadows into our world, or was he the only one brave enough to record what was already there? I've been awake most nights since the hangar. Shadows drift across my ceiling, always in the corners. Flat, silent, impossible to catch all at once. I tell myself it's exhaustion, that I'm still younger than Marsh ever was when he vanished. But when I close my eyes, I see that crouching form staring back at me. Head bowed, shoulders slumped in resignation or anticipation. I started keeping a log of occurrences. It began with small things. The creak of floorboards outside my door when no one was there. The faint click of a shutter behind me in a dark room. Then the prints began to move on their own. Frames that had been perfectly aligned on the office stairwell now sat askew, corners curling as if an unseen hand had lifted them. On one wall, the JD print slipped down its nail by an inch, the shadow's head tilting ever so slightly to one side. I repinned it. Next morning, it was askew again. Detective Linden called me last week, voice low on the line. "They're asking questions downtown," she said. "The DA wants this file closed." She hesitated. "Rich families are involved, asset freezes, donations. They want us to say Marsh's work was contaminated, case closed, no scandal." I told her I'd seen the memo. "They'll bury everything if we let them," she said. "You still want to testify?" My hand shook around the phone. "I can't stay silent," I said. That afternoon, I packed my notes and headed to the DA's office. The grand corridor smelled of polished wood and stale cologne. I met the lead prosecutor. Slick suit, perfect backstory. A father who was once chief of staff. He smiled thinly when I handed over the hangar photographs and chemical reports. "This is compelling," he said. "But the families of the victims have asked for closure. They'd rather not have these reopening wounds." I stared at him. "Closure built on silence isn't justice," I said. He looked away, pressed his lips together. "I'll see what I can do." I left with no assurances. Outside, the city hummed through late afternoon traffic, oblivious to what waited behind locked doors. I realized I'd become what Marsh had been in his own circle, a man willing to chase shadows no one else wanted to acknowledge. Yet, Marsh had gone further, tipping the scales of perception with his chemicals. I was only armed with truth and stubbornness, and sometimes that isn't enough. My home office grew cluttered. Every drawer stuffed with contact print sheets, lab reports, witness statements. I taped enlarged anomalies to the walls, drawing red circles of my own around corners where the light betrayed reason. Friends stopped returning calls. Neighbors moved away. I heard once that guilt has a sound, like a train on creaking tracks. Mine sounded like rain on a tin roof at 2 a.m. One evening, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Inside, a single Polaroid instant print. My living room, shot from behind the couch. On the coffee table, my own coffee cup, still half empty. In the far corner, a faint shadow pressed flat against the wall, the same shape that haunted Marsh's photographs. Whoever sent it knew my routines, my isolation. I called Lyndon in a panic. She told me to file a report, but advised against involving patrol. They'd scoff at haunted camera work. "Just be careful," she said. The next day, my car battery was dead. I didn't touch it. I walked to work, passing the stained glass windows of a church where I used to pray under less complicated skies. Inside, a priest nodded at me. I nearly broke down, realizing I'd outgrown faith when I'd seen too much. Outside, a stray dog followed me for blocks, nose low. No collar. I tried to shoo it, but it kept pace. When I reached the station, it sat on the curb and watched me, golden eyes reflective in the early evening light. A silent watcher. Inside, Lieutenant Chen met me in the stairwell. He looked older, sagging shoulders, deep lines around his eyes. "You're a stubborn man," he said, half smiling. "I've read your petition. I can slow the closure, but it'll cost you." "What do you need?" I asked. He tapped the JD print on my stairwell wall, where it still hung crooked. Boxes from the hangar. Every single roll. Every negative. Secure them. Keep them safe. And don't show them to anyone outside our little circle. I nodded. "And when this is all over?" He shrugged. "The Bureau will move on. I'll put in for retirement. You'll disappear back into consulting. Marsh's secrets will stay secrets." I left that night feeling like a witness to my own undoing. At home, the Polaroid sat on my kitchen counter. That shadow was closer now, its head half visible around the edge of the print, walls trembling with its quiet presence. I reached out and flipped it over. Blank. I burned the Polaroid in my fireplace. The plastic curled, the image blackened, then ash. I watched it smolder until only glowing embers remained. Then I poured water on the coals, listening to the hiss of steam. The hearth went dark. I still sleep with the lights on. Sometimes I dream of Marsh reappearing in my doorway, film canister in hand, eyes hollow. He tilts his head at me. Azrenia. I want to ask him, what did you really see? But I wake before I speak. I stopped taking the dog for walks. It vanished one morning. Collar found on my doorstep. No note. I haven't replaced my battery. I walk these streets alone, waiting for shadows to shift, for someone to click a shutter. I keep my recorder on my nightstand, just in case I can capture something that words can't explain. My last phone call was to the family of Martin Crowley. His mother's voice cracked when I told her the inquiry was closing. "He deserved better," she whispered. "So do we." I said nothing, tears closing my throat. Right now, I sit in my dark office, writing these lines by flashlight. The power flickered an hour ago. I haven't bothered to call the electrician. I'm too afraid he'll find nothing wrong, and then I'll know the shadows are here to stay. I have one section left. One final confession. And then I'll press stop on this recording, lock these files away, and hope the next person who opens them has the courage to look the darkness in the eye. Because if I'm wrong, if none of this is real, then I'll have lost everything to a trick of the mind. But if I'm right, then the world needs to see what I've recorded, no matter how badly it might shatter them. I wake to the hiss of my own breath in the dark, the faint click of the recorder's red light echoing like a pulse against my skull. Tonight, I'm alone in this office, surrounded by files I never thought I'd see again. The Carter prints, the Crowley photos, the JD frames, all tucked away in drawers I've numbered and labeled so meticulously that it feels like warding off chaos itself. But the real disorder has crept inside me, and no filing system can contain it. I light a single lamp on the corner of my desk, and its yellow glow flickers across the photos pinned to the wall. The JD image hangs crooked again, though I swear I straightened it yesterday. The shadow's head now tilts at an impossible angle, as if acknowledging my presence. My hands tremble when I remove it from the tack and smooth it back into place. The paper is brittle, the emulsion cracked, a sign of age or of something older trying to break free. I've spent these last few weeks retracing Marsh's steps, scouring chemical logs for every instance of nightshade alkaloids, cross-referencing case files in Portland, Seattle, and beyond. Every lead declined. Every audio tape locked away, by order of the DA, every witness who vanished from memory. I've spoken to the families. Some desperate for closure, others terrified I'd unleashed a flood they couldn't stop. I looked in their eyes and saw the same dread I feel in my chest. The knowledge that someone out there knows more than they've ever admitted. Last night, Chen sent me a file marked Final. It was the hangar inventory. Every single roll he'd secured under lock and key. Negative canisters and contact sheets from Calgary, Boise, San Diego. Places where Marsh never officially worked. I flipped through them one by one under a magnifier. Most were blank exposures, overexposed or underdeveloped. But at the end of box 12, roll 17, I found it. A shot of a man in a black suit standing alone on a tarmac at midnight. A private jet's engines idling behind him. On the far left corner, taller than any shadow should be, was his silhouette, distended, featureless, arms folded at his sides, watching. I recognized that figure from somewhere. His posture, the way his shoulders curved inward at the trap of his spine. It was me. I stared at the print until the white of the paper blurred, until the edges of my own silhouette felt like ice against my back. I dropped the negative on the table and fled the hangar office. The smell of old film and dust still clings to my clothes. Now, sitting here under the lamp's feeble halo, I realize the real revelation Marsh stumbled upon wasn't some supernatural imprint of guilt or death. He discovered that every camera, Every lens, every observer, carries their own shadow into every frame. The question isn't whether those shapes were visions of something beyond our senses, but whether they were reflections of the observer himself. Marsh died to the world when he fled. No one knows where. But his imprint remains in every photograph, etched into the emulsion by his chemical obsessions and his fractured mind. I lean forward and phone the DA's office. My voice is steady when I say, I have one more piece of evidence. The assistant fumbles for pen and paper. I tell her I'll deliver the tarmac photo myself. She hesitates, as if she senses what it implies. My name on the line, the finale of an inquiry that was never supposed to end this way. I hang up and pack the photo into a padded mailer. My hand lingers on the envelope, the weight of everything inside pressing into my palm. At dawn, I'll walk to the courthouse and offer the final roll to a system that tried so hard to ignore it. They'll see my silhouette, distorted and watchful, in a corner of the frame, and they'll have a choice. Call it a lab defect, a trick of light, or confront the truth that we're never just observers in these cases. The dawn light creeps through the blinds and catches motes of dust dancing in the air, but all I see is the haze of that hangar, the hush of concrete underfoot, and the endless line of prints with their creeping shadows. I've lost count of the nights I've sat here, backlit by a single lamp, tracing the edges of each silhouette until my vision warps, until the shapes begin to breathe on the warp of film rather than the paper they're printed on. I can't tell if the tremor in my hand is from exhaustion or the knowledge that every photograph I've ever taken carries a piece of me in its grain. It started when I found the tarmac shot. Me, alone on that runway, across from a private jet that seemed smaller than the darkness behind me. In that frame, my outline stood apart from everything else, a monument in black and white to the idea that no one can be purely an observer. I keep the negative in a small lead-lined envelope, taped shut, labeled "Do Not Open." But at night I hold it up to the lamp and let the light pierce through, warning myself that looking too long will make me part of the evidence. I've combed through Marsh's journal entries a dozen times, his spidery script detailing the exact compounds needed to shift perception, a formula so precise it's terrifying. He mixed scopolamine and atropine in exact ratios, dropped minute doses into his developer bath, then watched shadows that weren't really there dance across his prints. But my prints aren't his. My prints are mine. They were taken with a digital camera, a device Marsh never touched, free of fixer chemicals. And yet I see the shape. So I began experimenting, photographing empty rooms in my house, shooting the same scene at different angles, under different lights, then reviewing the files on my computer. The figure appears, every time, crouching in a corner too dark for my lens to capture under normal settings. It's as if the corner itself remembers me. I stopped telling people about it. Friends who know me as a by-the-book officer turned consultant would laugh if I described a self-fulfilling shadow that haunted my every frame. So I live with it. I record audio logs. Sometimes I speak into the recorder. Sometimes I leave it running in empty rooms, hoping to catch the soft click of a shutter or the rustle of fabric on film. Mostly I get silence, and then, just as I give up, a faint thump, the low murmur of static, and then the recorder clicks off as if someone hates being recorded. Last week, I revisited the Carter file one more time. Alan Carter, missing from his cabin in the woods, no witnesses, no suspects, just Marsh's photo of the empty doorway and that leaning shadow. I found the property deed. The land had been sold to a shell corporation days after his disappearance. I tracked the corporation to an LLC run out of a law firm in Portland. I went there, flashed my badge, demanded records. They refused. A lawyer in a tailored suit hinted that some things are better left unsolved. I left with a promise. "We'll close the file, officer, for everyone's sake." That phrase, "for everyone's sake," echoes in my head whenever I'm alone in the dark. For everyone's sake, stop asking questions. For everyone's sake, let secrets lie. For everyone's sake, don't shine a light into corners better left in shadow. But that goes against everything I am. I can't accept that some mysteries are off limits because powerful people demand it. So I made a choice. I'd go public. Not with the Bureau, not in another closed-door meeting, but out into the world. I drafted a report, my personal account unredacted. I scanned the JD frames, the Crowley prints, the Carter shot, and the tarmac image with my silhouette. Then I uploaded them to a secure server, encrypted under a pseudonym with a single public link embedded in a flash drive. I mailed it to 3 news organizations known for fearless reporting. I included a letter. "Here is the truth, unfiltered. Judge it yourselves." I returned home to find a single envelope in my mailbox, no return address. Inside, a mirror shard, cracked, jagged along the edges. I pressed it into my palm and saw my own reflection. Eyes shadowed beneath heavy lids, shoulders slumped with fatigue, mouth set in a thin line of resolve. But I also saw something else in that fractured glass, the corner of my office wall behind me, where the prints hang crooked, where the shadow waits just out of focus. That mirror shard sits on my desk now. I haven't the nerve to burn it. When the news organizations publish or bury the files, I'll know. Until then, I prepare for the knock at the door, the call from Internal Affairs, the letter from a lawyer threatening defamation. I've arranged for everything to be backed up, posted to multiple servers. Even if they seize my home, they won't seize every copy. Still, there's a cost. My phone battery's dead again, this time drained overnight. The dog never returned after I chased off the stranger in my yard. My mother asked how I was doing. Last night, I told her I'd never been better. It was a lie. And when I return home tonight, I suspect I'll find the JD print torn from the wall, the tarmac photo replaced by another Polaroid. Me, asleep at my desk, shadow draped behind me like a cloak. But this ends here. I will speak. I will publish. I will force the world to acknowledge that every photograph, every witness statement, every internal memo is tinged by the observer's presence. A camera never shows the whole story, and sometimes the most important figure in the frame is the one no one realizes is there. I step out into the gray morning drizzle, the flash drive burning a hole against my thigh under my coat. Every step down the cracked sidewalk echoes with the memory of footsteps that weren't mine. The ghostly parallel of someone else trailing me through sleepless nights. The city wakes around me in a dull hum. Engines coughing to life. Distant sirens threading through traffic. People intent on their routines. They don't know anything changed. They don't know that by today's dusk, every major newsroom in the country will hold my files, my evidence, my confession. They'll see the Crowley apartment, its luxury veneer shattered by a crouched silhouette Marsh captured and I preserved. They'll see Alan Carter's cabin doorway, empty yet watched. They'll see JD's padded room, haunted by absence. They'll see me, alone on a tarmac at midnight, my own shadow stretched impossibly behind me. My hands are steady when I enter the courthouse lobby. The polished marble floor gleams under fluorescent lights. I carry nothing but the padded clutch with my evidence, and the weight of every secret I've refused to bury. A clerk in a crisp blazer nods and directs me to the DA's office. On the way, I pass portraits of stoic judges and past district attorneys, faces that have ruled on cases far less complicated than this. To them, truth is delivered in neat packages, with clear chains of custody and unambiguous testimony. Today, I deliver chaos. In the DA's conference room, I lay out the prints in precise order. Crowley, Carter, J.D., the tarmac shot. I slide the chemical reports across the table, watch as the lead prosecutor's eyes narrow over spectral outlines and lab numbers. He flips through Marcia's own journal entries, his penmanship looping like a spider's web. I say nothing. Words would cheapen the testimony of the images themselves. The room stiffens. Outside, rain spatters against the windows, as if the sky itself hesitates to witness what unfolds. When the meeting ends, the prosecutor leans back and exhales. "You've done your duty," he says. "We'll reactivate the internal review, inform the families, prepare for appeals. This will be messy, but necessary." I nod, but in my gut I know the machinery of power grinds slowly. By the time they assemble hearings and annotations, the public's attention may have drifted. By the time they dredge up each film strip and chemical log, some families may have retreated, turned away from reopened wounds. I leave the courthouse under steel-gray clouds, feeling the press of unseen eyes in every reflected pane of glass. Back at my car, I cradle the tarmac negative one last time, slipping it into a laid envelope taped shut. I drive toward the river, where the Willamette coils through the city like an old secret. I park on the bridge, step out into the mist, and hold the envelope up to the ambient light. I don't open it. I don't need to. The proof is already loose in the world. Somewhere in a newsroom, someone's eyes will widen as they load my files, and they'll have to decide, call it contamination, dismiss it as artifact, or stare the shadows down and acknowledge that some things refuse to stay hidden. As I turn back to my car, I notice a scrap of film fluttering at the edge of the bridge railing, a single frame caught on the wind. I pick it up and press it to the light. It's blank. Yet, in its emptiness, I see the faintest imprint of my own silhouette. Head bowed, shoulders slumped. In that moment, I realize the final truth. The darkness I chased in Marcia's photographs was never his alone. It was mine, ours, carried in every observant eye, every flick of the shutter. I drop the scrap into the river, watching it drift beneath the arches and disappear. Tonight, I'll return to my empty office where the prints hang crooked, where the lamp sputters in anticipation. I'll sit behind my desk, press play on the recorder, and let these words echo into the darkness one last time. And when the lights go out, I will face the corner of the room where the shape waits. It was just past midnight when I first realized the gravity of what I'd uncovered. I'd been out on patrol, cruising the back roads that rimmed the county's western border, when the phone buzzed in my hand. An unmarked line from the State Bureau. They had questions. Questions they wouldn't ask in daylight, in the station, under the eyes of people who still whispered my name behind closed doors. I parked beneath a lone street lamp on Old Mill Road, the one near the shuttered farmhouse everyone said was haunted. By then, I'd stopped believing in ghosts. Reality was worse. I flicked the headlights off and answered. "Do you copy?" The voice was flat, professional. No small talk. "I'm here," I said, even though I wasn't sure I was. "What do you need?" "Meet us at the county airstrip in 30, they said. Then they hung up. The county airstrip was little more than a long patch of cracked asphalt in an abandoned hangar. It sat miles from town, far enough that cell service died before you finished dialing. I slipped into my car and drove in silence, the engine growling low, my breath shallow. When I pulled up, 3 unmarked state cruisers were lined up like sentries under dim floodlights. The hangar door was half open. I killed my lights and stepped out. The air smelled of oil and mildew, like an old lockup where time and truth rotted together. A pair of state agents met me near the opening. Agent Monroe, whom I'd worked with years ago, and a younger woman named Patel, whose face I didn't recognize but whose eyes were too sharp to ignore. "Officer Merritt?" Monroe's tone was more question than greeting. "It's Merritt," I corrected. "I'm not on the county payroll anymore." He nodded. "You still got the file?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were the photos I'd taken that night. Evidence cans stamped with names, Polaroids of uniforms next to body bags, pages torn from the hidden journals. Monroe's jaw went slack for a moment. "Good," he said. "We've got 2 hours before first light. Let's go over it." We stepped inside the hangar. It smelled like mothballs and old timber. Monroe set my photos on a crate while Patel hauled in a pair of folding chairs and a single bare bulb dangling from the rafters. She clicked it on. The light was harsh, white, official. Everything we'd been trying to erase. I sat, heart pounding, and watched Patel spread the photos across the crate. Each one felt like a bullet to the gut. I cleared my throat. "These were taken November 14th, 2011, I began, my voice low. "I was sent down to retrieve burglary files from 2004, found a door behind shelving, painted over, padlocked, no access records. I cut it myself." Monroe leaned in, examining a Polaroid of a young officer I recognized, Mark Holloway, standing over what looked like a body bag, a cold grin on his face. "Who pointed him out?" Monroe asked. I traced my finger along the photo's edge. "His badge number. The journal entries match handwriting samples from his personnel file. You'll see the pages where he's recording an interrogation of—" I paused, feeling the weight of names too real to speak. "Of the girl found in Black Hollow Mine, October 1994. Patel frowned, tapping a photo of tattered clothing. "This, what do you make of this?" She held up a piece of fabric stained dark. "Blood," I said. "But not just any. I ran toxicology details through lab contacts. It matches the pattern of a round from a duty weapon, an officer's weapon." Monroe stared at me. "You sure?" My throat tightened. "They're meticulous. Every injury, every bruise noted. Then there are notes on cleaning up, disposing. Fletcher's signature shows up at the end of each file. Approved." He claimed it was departmental security. "How many boxes?" Monroe asked. 7. I shifted in my seat, the hangar floor cold through my jeans. 7 boxes labeled with the victims' names. Inside were personal items, family photos, jewelry, things the families never got back, and journals where junior officers, including Holloway, recorded interrogation sessions. They fabricated charges, drug possession, tampering, trespassing, and squeezed these kids until they broke. Patel's face went pale. "But they didn't break. They died." I nodded. "That's where it ends." And the disposal notes. 5 mine shafts east of Crestwood. GPS coordinates. Fletcher and his lieutenant signed off. Monroe shook his head slowly. "So, the disappearances stopped when Fletcher retired." "Almost overnight," I confirmed. "No more files, no more necessary removals. And those mines went cold. Then the department got a new building, new brass. Everyone acted like it never happened." Patel's hand trembled as she picked up a Polaroid of a bloody journal page. "I thought we'd hit a wall with that initial tip," she said, voice tight. "But this is far beyond anything we imagined." Silence settled in the hangar. The only sound was my own breathing and the hum of the bulb overhead. I looked at the photos on the crate. Faces frozen in time. Evidence of a betrayal I still struggled to process. Monroe cleared his throat. We need to move fast, get this to forensics, cross-reference every handwriting sample, every chain of custody gap. We'll need a warrant for Fletcher and Holloway, if they're even still alive. I swallowed. I'm in. He offered a curt nod. Then, let's get to work. I stood, feeling the years of exhaustion settle into my bones. We gathered the photos and loaded them into evidence bags. Patel eyed me, concern and gratitude in her gaze. Monroe tucked Fletcher's signature copies into his jacket. As we filed out into the chilly pre-dawn air, I realized I hadn't breathed properly since the moment I found that hidden door. Now I could breathe, but only because I'd chosen to break the silence. The hangar door closed behind us with a metallic clang, echoing in the quiet. And as the first pale light of morning touched the cracked asphalt, I knew there was no turning back. I drove out to those old mine shafts just as the sun broke over the horizon, the sky bleeding pale gold across the rolling hills. Agent Patel rode shotgun, her face still drawn from the night's revelations. Monroe followed in the second cruiser, lights off, sirens silent. We didn't speak. The gravel crunch under my tires sounded too loud, like it'd wake everyone in these hills who'd been sleeping for 20 years. I couldn't shake the image of those boxes behind the hidden door, each one a testament to lives snuffed out in silence. We passed the first shaft, gated and rusted, warning signs half peeled away. Fletcher's journals had coordinates for 5, but only 3 were marked by county records. The other 2 were off the map, hidden on private property. The first we visited sat on land now overgrown with brambles. Monroe had arranged a search warrant for the property owners' names, long gone or dead themselves. We showed it to the sheriff's deputy posted at the entrance. State Bureau, I told him. He nodded, stepped aside. We walked through waist-high weeds, Patel holding a GPS device, the red dot hovering over a patch of tangled blackberry canes. I knelt by the edge of the shaft. It yawned dark, like a mouth waiting to swallow the sun. Monroe snapped on gloves. Patel held the camera to record. I tested the soil, dry, cracked. I lowered a flashlight on a rope. It vanished into black. No echo came back. Fletcher's note said, "Lower carefully, evidence enclosed." I exhaled. "All right," I said. "Ready?" Patel dipped a pole camera down the shaft. The feed crackled on the small monitor. Wooden planks, collapsed beams, then a flash of something pale. A bone or a piece of clothing. Monroe cursed softly, knotting his jaw. I opened the evidence bag, pulled out a small tag marked Hunter, Leah, RN, October 12, 1994. I tied it to the rope. "Let's bring her home," I said. It took 2 hours of careful work, cutting through roots, propping beams, lowering mesh baskets to haul out what came. When the first basket broke the surface, Patel vomited behind a bush. The small bag inside was heavy, like a body. Monroe covered his face. I stood off to the side, feeling the weight in my chest. I'd been an officer for nearly 20 years, but nothing prepared you for the moment you saw justice clawed free from the earth. Bones, clothing fibers stiff with age, a locket inscribed, "For Leah, love forever." We bagged everything, tagged it, loaded it into the cruiser. Patel sat in the back, silent. Monroe stood by the shaft, blinking in the morning light. I put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll get 'em all," I said. He nodded, but his eyes were cold. We moved on to the second shaft, deeper in the county forest. Trees arched overhead, thick canopy that starved the ground of light. Fletcher's coordinates led us to a fallen stone marker half swallowed by moss. The shaft mouth was narrower, concealed by ferns. I cut through vines. Monroe pried the cap off with a crowbar. A hiss of stale air escaped, carrying a faint tang of rust and rot. We set up lights, cameras, bloodhound units on standby in case we caught any stray scents. None came. I let the dogs sniff the rim. They backed off, ears flat. Anatomy of decay too old, too cleaned. Lowering the camera first, we saw the inside walls streaked with mineral stains, old timber supports long splintered. Then, an object. A metal box. 15 years buried, yet the latch still intact. I found Fletcher's signature etched on the side, initials scratched deep. DFW, Monroe whistled. "That's his mark," Patel jotted notes, voice trembling. I eased the box onto the ground, pried it open. Inside were personal items, wallet, ID, a teenage girl's diary. I thumbed the pages. Heartbreak at leaving home. Worries about money, then entries cut short, crossed out. Under the diary, a folded scrap, a photograph of the girl smiling at prom. I held it like a relic. She was 18 when it happened. The third shaft was trickier. On private land now owned by a hunting lodge, gated passages and no trespassing signs, Monroe flashed the warrant at a late-night caretaker, who muttered curses but let us through. We arrived at an old logging road, tires crunching on loose gravel. The shaft sat inside a corral of fallen fences. Heaps of coal dust marked its entrance. Fletcher's note warned of cave-ins. We reinforced it with steel beams and sent the camera in. It revealed a narrow chamber, scant air, bones pressed against the walls. We couldn't haul it out immediately. We marked the spot, flagged coordinates for a later dig team. By mid-afternoon, I was numb. Patel looked exhausted, her face drawn with grief for people she'd never known. Monroe stared out over the fields, jaw clenched. We radioed the Bureau to dispatch cadaver teams, forensic anthropologists. They'd finish excavating and send us the rest of the remains for DNA. We'd notify families, if they could be found. Some had no living kin. On the drive back, the air in the cruiser was thick. None of us spoke. The weight of what we'd uncovered sat like a boulder between us. I thought of the families in 1994, holding candlelight vigils, wondering where their children were. I thought of the officers who took an oath to serve and protect, then used that authority to conceal murder. I thought of Fletcher and Carson, safe in nursing homes or new lives, shielded by silence. We dropped Patel at the state office first. She thanked me quietly, voice hoarse. Monroe went to coordinate with lab techs. I headed back to my safe house, headlights cutting a path through dusk. The road felt endless, but I knew the work was just beginning. Excavation reports, autopsy confirmations, court orders, the gears of justice grinding forward after years of idling. That night, I sat alone in the dark, the envelope of photos on the table, Fletcher's initials glaring at me like a challenge. I poured a drink, neat whiskey, and stared at the wall. I heard voices in my head, Leah's laughter, the girl's prom night smile, the scratch of journal ink. I blinked back tears I couldn't afford. Years ago, I might have refused this path. Now, I knew we owed them more than secrecy, and as sleep slipped away, I realized every manila box we left behind, every hidden door unopened, every story buried in dust, it all ends the same way. Someone eventually digs it up. Silence isn't safety. Silence is what they count on. And once you pull that lock apart, you can't put it back. We hit the trial prep mid-morning, but dawn came too early. I'd barely slept, the echoes of that hangar and the shafts chasing me into nightmares. In the courthouse parking lot, the air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes suits cling. I stepped out of my car, chest tight, and looked up at the marble facade. It gleamed in the rising sun like it believed in justice. I wasn't sure I could. Inside, Agent Monroe had arranged a secure line to the DA's office. We met in a back conference room off the basement, the walls already plastered with case files and binders. The table groaned under the weight of evidence. Polaroids in plastic sleeves, journal transcripts, chain of custody logs. There was even audio from the state bugs. Hushed voices planning evidence disposal. One mention of burying it deeper this time. The DA, a woman named Harrison, 60-something, sharp as a razor, studied each item with cold calculation. "Thank you for bringing this forward," she said, voice low. "We'll need you to validate every piece on the stand. The defense will attack your credibility, argue you fabricated these photos, that you tampered with the scene." She paused. "They'll call Fletcher senile. They'll call Holloway a victim of circumstance. They'll paint you as a crusader who went rogue." My throat tightened. "I know what they'll say. I'm ready." She raised an eyebrow. "We'll see. But first, discovery. They file motions today. By the time jury selection starts next week, we'll bleed them dry with depositions." She tapped the Polaroids. "Keep your phone off. No talking to the press. No mention of witness protection status. Are we clear?" "Crystal," I said. "Bullshit." But I nodded. By noon, I was in a deposition room with DA Harrison, Agent Patel, and a defense attorney named Cohen. Slick, too confident, as if the truth could be argued into oblivion. Cohen studied me like I was a crime scene. He asked what I remembered about my keycard logs, the bolt cutters, the timing of my discovery. He asked why I didn't report to local command, why I contacted state police directly. He asked if I'd ever had a grudge against Crestwood, if I knew any of the accused personally. The needle on the polygraph monitor slid back and forth. I kept my answers short, measured. "Isn't it true, Officer Merritt," Cohen said, leaning forward, "that you've been seeking recognition for your career? That you're disgruntled you never made detective? That you wanted to prove yourself?" I showed him the photos of battered clothing, the bullet-torn jacket. "These kids never got justice," I said. "If you want to call that a crusade, fine." He scribbled notes. "You have no direct evidence they died, do you? No bodies, just old journals and hearsay." He smiled. I closed my eyes. "You'll see the remains," I said quietly. "You'll see the shoes, the bones. You'll see these families get closure." He shrugged. "For some, not all." He flipped to a new page. "Why'd you let Patel take control of the evidence? Why not the county DA's office?" I met his gaze. "Because I knew who'd protect it. I knew who wouldn't." He stared a moment longer, then moved on. The deposition ended after 2 hours. My throat was raw. Patel steered me out, her hand on my arm. "You did fine," she whispered. Next steps, jury selection Monday. Experts on forensic anthropology would testify to the mine shaft finds. The labs had confirmed matching DNA for 3 of the victims, and they'd narrowed down 2 more to familial clusters. Fletcher's signature on the lids and Holloway's fingerprint on the handles. Hard to explain away. But Cohen would spin it, twist it, call it an elaborate frame. He'd remind the jury I'd entered that hidden room after hours, against orders. He'd contaminate the chain. For the next 2 days, I holed up in my safe house. My wife, who went by Mrs. Smith now, texted that our daughter missed me. I stared at the screen and deleted it. I hadn't seen her in months. The threats hadn't stopped after we relocated. Emails with photos of my old house, notes that I'd end up like them if I didn't drop it. I slept on a cot, waking every 2 hours to check the locks. My nightmares were full of empty shafts and Polaroids dancing on walls, smiling officers in crisp uniforms, giving me a thumbs up. Saturday morning, Monroe drove me to meet the jurors. We loaded the remaining evidence into a van, sealed crates, nothing left to chance. I watched the city pass by, strip malls, diners, lawn signs. Nothing about this place was supposed to hide murder. We reached the selection room, sterile chairs, a small stage where we'd give opening arguments. I practiced my testimony again, calm, restrained, factual. No emotion, just what I saw. Jurors filed in, 9 women, 3 men. They looked ordinary, teachers, retirees, a nurse. I studied their faces. All sweet, and then you mention police corruption, buried bodies, secret evidence rooms. They flip like a switch. The DA summoned me to the lectern. I took the oath. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" And I swore it, though truth felt brittle against the weight of years. When opening statements began, Cohen got first word. He painted me as a rogue cop on a vendetta, bent on exposing a phantom crime. "Where's the proof the kids died?" he asked. He held up an empty evidence bag for effect. The gallery stirred. A mother sniffed. Harrison countered by walking them through that hangar meeting, the photos, the shafts. She described the mine dig, the dogs, the artifacts. She spoke of families who waited decades for answers. She ended by showing the jury a picture of Leah's locket, the one her mother had traced to a pawnshop in Philadelphia. She paused. "This is proof." A hush fell. Someone coughed in the back. That locket was more real than anything else. Over the next week, expert witnesses testified, pathologists, geologists, handwriting analysts. Everyone pointed to one conclusion. Crestwood, PD, under Fletcher's command, murdered and concealed. Holloway's defense crumbled, though he still sat calm in the back, beard gray. He barely looked at me. On the final day, they brought in Fletcher. He shuffled in on a walker, clothes neat, beard bristly. His dementia was real, one moment lucid, the next confused. But with Harrison's careful questioning, he recounted the mine shafts, the decisions, the names. He said, "We made tough calls," and stared blankly at the ceiling, as if seeing ghosts. The jury deliberated 4 hours. My own hands shook so badly I could barely light a cigarette. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, relief should have washed over me. I felt numb. Fletcher wept quietly, broken. Holloway turned his head, eyes red. Outside, families hugged, sobbed. Reporters swarmed, flashes popping. Someone yelled, "Justice!" I looked away. I watched those families find the closure I stole back for them. But I also realized the cost, my anonymity, my peace, my faith in the oath. That night, I packed the last of my things. Mrs. Smith slipped a note under the door. "Proud of you. Come home soon." I stared at it and left it behind. I drove away without headlights into the dark, because I didn't want anyone to see me. I didn't want to believe this was over. The road stretched on, empty, relentless. And as the courthouse lights disappeared behind me, I realized they got their verdict. The files were public now, but Fletcher's victims deserved more than a trial. They deserved to be remembered, their names etched on a plaque, not buried in dirt or hidden rooms. And me, I'd done my duty, but I'd lost too much. So I keep moving. Call it a witness relocation, call it exile. There's no peace in staying. Not when you know what people are capable of and how easy it is to disappear. The highway hums under the tires, a lullaby for sinners and saints alike. I'll wind up somewhere no one knows me. Maybe pick up another badge someday, but I'll never forget. I drove until the tires hummed into a rhythm I could almost sleep to, but sleep never came. The whiskey in my flask turned warm, and I kept it tucked in my coat pocket, a promise I'd break later or sooner. Behind me lay the courthouse lights and the family's tears. Ahead lay miles of asphalt, Nothing but the night and the headlights carving a path. I flashed through my mind the names of the 7 victims: Leah, Marcus, Denise, Carla, Tony, Ruth, and young Samuel. I said them quietly, one after the other, like a litany. Their names deserved to be spoken, not sealed away in bureaucratic boxes or hidden behind painted-over doors. By dawn, I'd crossed 2 state lines. The smell of pine and early morning dew replaced the stench of coal dust and decay. I pulled over at a roadside diner, neon sign flickering, a handful of bleary-eyed locals nursing coffee. I sat at the counter, ordered eggs over easy, bacon crisp. The waitress gave me the side-eye when I paid with cash and didn't leave my name. I ate slowly, listening to the clatter of dishes and the drone of a police scanner over the diner's radio. It crackled with routine: fender benders, welfare checks, noise complaints. No mention of Crestwood or trials or hidden evidence rooms. Life moved on, but in my chest, time was stuck in 2011. I thought of Fletcher's confession, how he'd called those murders necessary removals. Necessary. As if lives could be weighed against departmental integrity. But what truly haunted me was the silence before discovery. The decades when the world believed those kids ran away, abandoned families in limbo, rumors swirling, but no answers. The community's faith in their protectors remained unshaken until I, a green officer with too much curiosity, pried a lock open. That lock was more than metal. It was trust, duty, morality. Once cut, nothing could restore it. I finished my coffee, left a tip under a sugar jar, and headed back on the highway. My safe house, what little of it remained, felt too permanent, too predictable. Instead, I rented a room under an alias in a town where no one asked questions. I unpacked the manila envelope of photos onto a small desk. The Polaroids of uniforms, body bags, journals stained with ink, and something dark I didn't want to name. I traced my finger over the brittle edges, recalling the hush of that hangar meeting and Patel's trembling hands. Each image was a confession in itself. That afternoon, I called Agent Monroe. The line was secure. He answered on the 3rd ring, voice heavy. "Need anything?" he asked. I hesitated. I need to know. Are there other departments who might have similar rooms? He sighed. After Crestwood went public, state police launched audits across dozens of small-town agencies. We found a few more hidden storerooms. Nothing on the scale of Crestwood, but files locked away, skeletons nobody wanted to see. A sheriff's office near Somerset had a closet full of photos from a raid in '99. Police beating suspects and burying the negatives. They've opened investigations. It's a start. Good, I said, because silence is contagious. Once one door opens, the next won't stay closed. He was quiet. Then, softly, "You did right, Merritt." I didn't respond. I replaced the receiver, listening to the dial tone. I wanted to tell him that justice was a promise I couldn't keep for myself. I wanted to say that I still dreamed of those shafts at night, but all I did was sip stale coffee and stare at the scattered photos. Weeks passed. I followed the Somerset news in detours across state lines, seeing other departments rearrange cupboards, rekey locks, public statements issued under pressure. Some chiefs resigned. Some officers were suspended. Slowly, the ripples spread outward. Local TV did segments. Hidden police evidence sparks new cold case reviews. A few journalists sniffed around, but once the state police confirmed their finds, the story ran and then faded. The world has short attention spans. 7 lives had waited 15 years. One more week of headlines wouldn't matter much in the long run. I stayed under the radar. I changed hotels every few nights, paid cash, used burner phones. Fear didn't grip me the way it had when I was a new patrolman facing my first armed suspect. This was different. Fear flavored with guilt. The guilt of knowing how many times I nearly stayed silent myself. Every badge in every department had a hidden door somewhere. Some might remain sealed forever. One evening, passing through a small town in Ohio, I saw a bulletin board outside the sheriff's office. Attention, veterans. Records audit meeting, Friday at 6 p.m. A simple flyer, typed on plain paper. My heart thumped. I recognized the wording, borrowed from the Crestwood audit announcement. I parked across the street, watched the lights come on in the office. Men and women in uniform filed in, some shaking their heads, some flipping through reports. I realized they were reenacting the same scene, discovering things they shouldn't, facing the choice I'd faced 4 years ago, lock it up and walk away, or stomp on the padlock and pull the truth out. I drove off without stopping, but that meeting stayed with me. The system had inertia. Good people could push against it, but old habits died hard. Silence had allies in fear and complacency. But some nights in a dank basement or a forgotten evidence room, truth lounged behind painted walls, waiting for someone to pry it free. And every time it did, the world shifted just a bit. Years have crawled by. I'm in my late 50s now, gray at the temples. Each line on my face a map of sleepless nights. I've moved again, this time somewhere quiet, on the coast, where waves crash instead of gravel crunching. I live off the grid, writing these confessions into a battered recorder I hide in a drawer. No audience but myself and whoever else finds it. I collect the stories of others, agents, officers, reporters who dared to speak. It's my penance, my legacy. Sometimes children play on the beach at dusk, their laughter echoing off sandstone cliffs. I watch them, imagining those I couldn't save. I whisper their names into the wind: Leah, Marcus, Denise, Carla, Tony, Ruth, Samuel, and I swear to remember. In the end, I carry their silence no longer. I carry their names. But I still hear the click of a lock every so often, as if dead men and women are rattling keys in some shuttered evidence room, reminding me that truth, once discovered, refuses to be buried. And that's how I know I'll never be free.